Hey everyone, I'm Shreyas. I'm a founder at Llama. Llama is an on-chain access control and governance product for smart contracts. So if you have a protocol and you've deployed contracts, Llama is how you could manage your smart contract operations, encode roles, and have things like token voting and treasury management built in. The core piece of why Llama was built was to solve this problem of empowering contributors and users over speculators and politicians. And I'll walk through.
My sound's not working, Dave.
I'll walk through in detail what that means. The first thing that's really important when thinking about governance is defining exactly what to govern. And so a key principle to use here is to automate what you can and govern what you can't automate. And what that means is anything that can be encoded in your core contracts in your protocol should be, and only what can't be should be left to a governance system. And so if you're a decentralized exchange or you're a lending protocol, you've already got to think through what piece of this can actually run on autopilot and what needs human decision making. For example, if you're a lending protocol, then you can actually encode most of the logic for how lending and borrowing works, but the particular risk parameter updates need to be governed, because how do you decide what the borrower's supply cap is on USDC, on Arbitrum? That depends on market conditions. You can't fully automate that. You kind of need risk managers or some experts to actually decide how those parameter updates are done. Or in Uniswap's case, they're a decentralized exchange, how and when they deploy fees and on which networks they deploy it, which pools they deploy it, that is like a subjective question. Allocating a treasury is always a subjective question. And so really thinking through what actually needs to be governed is important. A really important part of this is setting what your goals are. And so this sounds simple, but a lot of projects actually don't think about what really matters to them. Is it TVL? Is it growth? Is it users? Is it number of participants in your community? Is it the value of their treasury? And based on these goals, you should set up what your governance system and configuration looks like. One of the key learnings we've had is to decentralize through access control rather than through tokens. And so it's very important to make sure that each participant is given the role that they're best suited to do, and you almost operate with the principle of least privilege. So if you guys are engineers, you're familiar with the idea that you actually don't want to give access control and permissions pretty loosely. You want to limit the permissioning system to what each participant is best suited to do, and revoke excess permissions when needed. And so, as an example, you can think of 3 on-chain roles. So let's say your core team. Your core team has the ability to upgrade proxy contracts, to maybe pause or unpause the protocol if needed. But your core team doesn't have some of the abilities that maybe some of the contributors and token holders have. And so your contributors have the ability to whitelist new operators, new tokens, and potentially your token holders have the ability to prevent abuses of power by your contributors and to allocate the treasury. But they don't have to make routine decisions that are done by contributors or risk experts. So if you had to take like one takeaway from this talk, it's the idea that contributors should make routine decisions and token holders should prevent abuses of power. And that's a good way to think about how you design roles. And so I think earlier there was a question here about preventing things like bribery. And if you think about token voting, it's very susceptible to 51% attacks, right? Because if you own, or if few stakeholders combined own 51% of the network, then you could pretty much do anything. You could transfer the treasury to yourself, you could change parameters to what you want, and tokens are in the open market, people can buy tokens. And so I think DAOs haven't experienced like adversarial attacks yet, but it will happen at some point when there are $20 billion protocols. You'll probably have activist investors trying to 51% attack a project. And so one way to prevent that is to have roles defined to what each group is suited to do. So token holders need not be suited to update proxy contracts, but they're suited to prevent abuses of power. They're suited to make sure that the people who are entrusted to update proxy contracts are the right ones to do it, and they could revoke their power and permission when needed. Another key component to do when you're setting up your governance system is thinking through approval strategies. So how do you tailor the approval strategies as just the rules for how you execute an on-chain action? So for example, if you are transferring tokens from a treasury, how do you exactly do that? Do you need 10% of your project to approve it? Do you need 20%? And the way you define that is based on the severity and the frequency of the action. So for example, here you have a small fund transfer that should go through a very fast approval process because it's a low amount that you're transferring, it's a low security, it's probably a high frequency action, so you want it to happen very quickly. And so maybe you have a lower approval threshold to send a small amount of funds, but for sending a larger amount of funds from your treasury, you want to have a higher approval threshold, but you want more percentage of your project to approve it. And so other examples of this would be if you're calling a pause function in your protocol, you want the pause function to be called pretty quickly, right? Because the pause function is an emergency action, so you want it to be done as fast as you can. And so almost near instant execution as long as an approval threshold is met. But something like upgrading proxy contracts, you probably want a 3-day time lock so that it goes through a rigorous process of testing and simulations so that people can actually veto and prevent that update if the upgrade is not right. Your treasury is a key component of your system, and this is back to like the original point of govern what you can't automate. Allocating the treasury is one piece of what will always kind of remain in the hands of governance because you could set rules, but you really truly can't automate how you want to allocate capital for the effectiveness and the growth of your project. And one key thing to do is to make sure that you can actually have, and this is something we enable at Llama, and we'd love to see more projects do this, where you can actually have multiple accounts for distinct capital allocation decisions. So what that means is maybe you have a main treasury with a high bar for how you move funds, and so maybe that requires like 10 or 20% of your token holders to approve fund transfers from that treasury. But then you have sub-accounts with granular rules and permissions. So maybe you have an account for your operations team or your other teams to actually allocate capital much more quickly to make sure that you don't sacrifice effectiveness for a false sense of security. And so one problem that's happening today is that a lot of protocols just have this one big treasury, and so they have, say, a $10 billion treasury, and so the only proposals that go through that treasury are extremely large ones. And so the only people proposing things are like asking for $1 million sort of service provider proposal or grant. And instead, if you had multiple accounts, you could have a way quicker, easier allocation of smaller amounts. And lastly, we kind of live in this cross-chain, multi-chain world. And so I think it's super critical to actually deploy your instance across all the chains that you're on and have a simple, unified way to create and manage actions and permissions and approval strategies across all these chains. And you want to make sure that things are consistent, because most protocols and organizations view them as one single protocol entity, and they just want all the other chains to reflect what their org wants. And so the idea potentially eventually that you'll have maybe an instance on an L2 and you'll govern actions across all the other L2s or a layer 1 chain, I think is cool, and hope to see more of that this year, where you can kind of save on gas costs by voting on an L2, but you can have the action kind of relate across all the other chains you're on. Awesome, so that was it from my side. If anyone has questions, would love to take it right now.
Do you have Pokemons?
I don't have Pokemons, but...
Well, that might be no question then. Or any question to Shreyas? Okay, seems your presentation was really good.
Thank you. Great chatting. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm Hello Shreyas on Twitter. And yeah, if you're running a protocol, would love to help deploy your instance. Thank you.